Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into OTRAM's YouTube channel. Today we've got a 97 80 series Land Cruiser in, and we're going to do Harrop E-lockers and Yukon 488 gears. We've already got the rear third member out. It's gone one cycle through the parts washer to get all the big stuff off, and we'll start tearing it down. So let me pan you over and zoom you in a bit. So the first thing we're going to do to get ready is mark our bearing caps and our adjusters so that they stay the same side to side. And I just take a center punch and just I do 3 marks on one side and 4 on the other. There we go. And then we can take the adjuster locks off. Set them off to the side. Take our bearing caps loose. Go ahead and back one of the adjusters off to make it easier to take the caps off. And we're putting new bearings in, so we don't have to keep track of the old races, and it doesn't matter that I dropped this one on the floor. So we can go ahead and take the whole carrier and ring gear out. The only thing we're reusing out of the old assembly is the ring gear bolts, so we'll pull them in a little bit. Now I can flip the housing over. And get it ready to pull the pinion. Let me go grab a punch and we'll drive that through. Actually, I'm going to put the pinion nut loosely back on there just to keep it from dropping out. Well, it felt like that was about it. There, we can get the pinion flange off now and get a better tap on. There we go. Pinion out, and again we've got new crush sleeve and new bearings, so all we're going to start out with off this is the master shim in here. We'll pull that apart in a bit, and I didn't bring a pry bar over to take the seal out. There we go. Pop the old pinion seal out. You've got the outer bearing, the oil slinger that we'll reuse, so we'll set that aside. And then we'll drive the races out of here. You can just reach down in there. Knock the old pinion races out. Then we'll do the same thing for the inner, or the outer rather. There we go. And now I can pull this back out of the mount I've got it in, and we'll mark it to drill our electrical fitting hole. So let me get that all prepped up and I'll bring you back. Okay, so I got a little bit ahead of myself with saying we were ready to drill the hole in the housing. I was thinking ARB air locker, where you just mark it, drill it, and run your line to wherever you drilled the hole. But the E-locker, we need to make sure that we've got enough wire to reach. So we've got to go ahead and set up our carrier so we can drop it in and measure out where the wire goes. Off camera, I took an oil stone and stoned the back side of the ring gear lightly, as well as the mating surface on the carrier itself, just to make sure there's no high spots, no dings, anything that's going to keep this ring gear from sitting flat. I warmed the ring up in oven, like 150 degrees for about 20 minutes to expand it just enough to drop easily over the carrier. And I've taken the bolts out of our old ring gear, run them through the ultrasonic cleaner to clean them all up, and plunked them back in here and let everything cool down. So now we're ready to actually install the ring gear. So put a little red Loctite in each of the ring gear bolts, and it's just a bolt that goes through to the back side of the carrier, and we'll thread these on. And I'll go ahead and do all these and move it over to the press and clamp it down so we can actually torque them. So I'll bring you back in just a moment. Okay, so we've got all of our ring gear nuts and bolts loosely in here. I've moved over to the press to clamp it to make it easier to torque everything. I've got an aluminum seal driver, bearing driver on the bottom and another one on the top so we don't mar the carrier. And then we're just going to turn the pump on the press and apply just enough pressure to lock this in from spinning. And I apologize in advance, the pump is noisy. Let me actually go get a different socket. Okay, so I won't make you guys sit through torquing all of those, but I'm just going to keep going in a crisscross pattern till they're all tight, and then I'm going to make just a couple of loops around to make sure I've got them all. And then it'll be time to press the carrier bearings on, so I'll bring you back for that in just a moment. Okay, so I've gone around, I've torqued all the ring gear bolts up to 70 foot-pounds, and I've gone ahead and put paint marker stripes across them so we can tell if any of the nuts have backed off in the future. Now we can take our carrier bearing, set it up here, and then I've machined a driver that fits so that it clears the cage And then it also clears the ID so we don't drag on the carrier. So we'll stick that guy in there and center it up. And we'll press it on. And you've got to have a little bit of recess on the inside here because the carrier sticks just a hair past the inside of the bearing race. And now we're going to flip it over and do the other side, and I've got a smaller aluminum puck that makes sure I clear the race now that's on there. So we'll put that down there, flip the whole assembly over, make sure that our race isn't caught on anything. Set this bearing up there. I really like this new press, but the ram retracts so slow. There we go. I'll center that guy up. And there we go. Our carrier bearings are on. So I guess while we're over here, I'm going to go ahead and swap the pinion bearings while we've got the press set up. So I'll go set that up and we'll be right back. Okay, so we've loosely got the carrier back in the differential housing, and you can see our wires for the E-locker. And we kind of want to, judge where this is going to sit and then find a good spot within the wire length that it's going to come out. And it's hard to see, but down here, like right on top of the housing, is a good spot that this wire will poke through and come out the top and be out of the way. So I'm going to take the carrier back out, center punch, and drill my hole to the Harrop supplied size, and run this differential housing back through the parts washer again to make sure I don't have any metal contamination in it. And then we'll come back and actually start reassembling everything. So we've got our hole drilled, we've got the housing washed again and back out of the parts washer and cooled back down. We've got our bearings pressed on the pinion. I went ahead and just put a light coat of gear oil on the pinion bearings. And then we're just gonna stick the pinion up through here, stick the outer bearing on it. And put the pinion on there lightly so I don't drop this. And then just go ahead tap that on there far enough that I can get the washer under the pinion nut. And then we're just going to snug this down. And we're not looking for critical measurements yet. We just want some drag on this bearing so that we can start setting our pinion depth. So flip that back over. And let me spin the camera around so you can see Crash dancing. He's done. We'll zoom you out a little bit. But let me turn it sideways a bit. Now we can take our diff we can drop it down in here, making sure we've got the wires spun around in the right direction. There we go. We can take our adjusty caps, match up our punch marks, make sure we've got them on the right sides. And then same with our bearing caps. And the easiest way I've found to do them is to hold the cap up and start the bolts by like a thread. And then you can wiggle the caps down, and that'll keep them from cross-threading on your adjusters. And we'll just finger tight those. And do the other side. And right now we're just trying to set our initial pattern, so we're not super concerned with bearing preload. Just as long as we have some. Whoop. So I'm going to snug this side up a bit. And then we don't have any backlash yet. So I'll loosen this side, loosen this side 1 notch. And then tighten this one 1 notch. There, we're starting to get some backlash. So let's go ahead and check that. So we've got about 5 thousandths there. So I'm going to loosen this side 1 more notch. And tighten this one 1 more. And there we've got right about 7.5 thousandths. Let me spin this around. See if I can zoom in on that. But there's about 7, maybe 8 thousandths. For our initial run, we'll leave it there to check it. Let me zoom you back out a little bit. I'll spin this around so you can see the teeth side. And we'll get a little bit of gear marking compound on there to see how we look. And I just do a light coat on a couple of teeth, about 1/3 of the way around the ring. You want a nice even coat, but not too much, because if you have too much on there, it's just going to smear and track instead of actually making a readable pattern. So there we go. We've got a couple of spots painted. And then I usually just put a glove on and use that as friction against the ring while I turn the drive shaft flange. Grab my paper towel. I got oil on the flange when I did the bearings. Can't get a grip. So you just want to add some resistance so that it actually smears the marking compound out of the way. We'll go back the other way, same thing. And I'll keep, I'm going to run this around a few more times, and then I'll zoom you in to see the pattern. We're actually looking pretty good so far, which is crazy since this is our first shot, and usually it takes a couple of times. So let me mess with that, and I'll bring you back. Okay, so off camera, I played around a little bit more, spinning it to check the pattern. It was a little bit on the loose side. I took the backlash from 8/1000 to 7/1000. Got a good pattern, so I went ahead and tore everything back apart so that we can put the seals and everything else in. So what we'll do, first we'll stick our outer pinion bearing. We'll stick that guy down in the bore. And then we'll take our oil slinger, sit that on top. And then we'll get the pinion seal. And I like to take a little bit of sealer and run it around the outside edge of the pinion seal just to give myself a little bit extra insurance against leaks. And then we'll set that guy on top of there. Knock it in. Clean off the excess sealer. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of gear oil and lube up the inside of the pinion seal. And then the inside splines on the flange, we're going to spread some sealer around in the splines so that when we put it back together, there's no leak path out through the splines. Then we'll grab our pinion, drop our new crush sleeve on it, and same as we did earlier, feed this up through, feed the flange down on, lightly stick our nut on there so it holds up and we can't drop it. Oops, and I just realized I'm blocking the camera. But now we've got it through far enough we can stick our washer on. And what I like to do is draw it up a little bit. Till our pinion's almost through the nut. And then we can take and clean any of the sealer that got in the pinion threads out. And same thing with the nut. We put a little red Loctite on the pinion nut. Spin that back on there. So before we could take up the slack just by tightening this nut down because we didn't have the crush spacer in there yet. Now we're actually going to have to apply some actual torque to this to crush that crush sleeve and get down to our right pinion depth, because right now we're pretty sloppy. So I just bump it with an impact. You can put like a holding tool bolted on here and do it with a long torque wrench. I find it easier with the impact. You just have to watch out because you can go too far real easy. So we're going to bump it down till we start getting resistance, and then we'll start checking it with a torque wrench. And as I'm going, I just lift up and see if there's still slop. So there, we're starting to get rid of the slop. Still a little bit there. There, we're starting to get some drag. And I neglected to look this up. We want 12 to 15 inch-pounds on a new bearing. So we'll stick our inch-pound torque wrench on there. And right now, we've got about 7. So we're getting close. So you just want to barely bump this. And there we're at about 9. If you go too far, you end up taking everything back apart and starting over. So there's right about 13. Go around a couple of times just to be sure. So yeah, there's 13. So we're good. We're right where we want to be. And there's a notch here in the pinion nut, or in the pinion flange. We're just going to go ahead and stake the end of the nut over into the flange. And we're going to take our magic marker and draw a witness line across, just so if in the future anything goes wrong, we know if that came loose. Now spin it back over. And go back to putting the top side back again. go. Stick those in there loosely. Stick our bearing caps back on. And this one we're going to end up taking back off. Actually, I may go ahead and put that piece in now. Yeah. We'll go ahead and stick the locking ring for the electrical fitting in there. Just loosely for now. And I missed this tab. Okay, so the struggle was real getting this tab in here. I'm not really sure why I was having an issue, but every time I would get it lined up, I'd pop one of the tabs out. Anyway, so it's in there now. Our caps, I loosely put this side in, tightened this one until I just had a hair bit of play. I snugged the pinion side back up to take the slack out, and then I've loosened it off. So now we're going to set the actual carrier bearing preload. And what we're going to do, we're going to stick our dial indicator on the face of the adjuster cap over here. And unfortunately, I might be able to spin this so you can see. Yeah, you should be able to see that. We're going to snug up the pinion side until that needle just starts to deflect. And there we go, it's just starting to move. And then we're going to go 1.5 notches past that to set our initial preload. And then we're going to come back around and start doing our backlash again. And we know that we want 7 thousandths. And right now, we've got about 15. So I'm going to loosen up the pinion side by 2 notches. And I'm going to tighten the drive side by 2 notches. And we'll recheck it. So to keep our set preload, you move the adjusters the same amount of notches. And there we're right about 8. So I'm going to come 1 notch loose on this side. And come on. And 1 notch tight over here. And recheck it. And that's way too tight. So we're going to come back and just loosen this side a hair. We're still too tight, so we're going to loosen up a bit more. And then tighten this side again. Sometimes you gotta just kind of dance back and forth until it's happy. There we go. Now we've got 7. So we've checked it there. And since we're doing our final pattern, we're going to check it in a couple of spots on the ring just to make sure that everything's kosher. And there we've got about 7 again. About 7, so everything seems happy as far as backlash goes. So we're going to add a little bit of fresh gear marking compound to the spots that we marked the first time around. Put my glove on. Let me spin this back around the other way so you can see the actual ring gear side. And same as before, we'll just spin it around while adding drag. There we go, and our pattern looks good. So now we can take these out one at a time, put some Loctite on them, and final torque them. And on this truck, those get torqued to 70. There we go. And we'll paint marker them. and put a little Loctite on our retainer nuts. We can stick these in. Sometimes you got to tap these a little bit to get them to line up, but these are actually going in quite nice. There we go. Give her one final spin, see how she feels. Make sure there's some play on the magnet ring. And then we can put a little shmoo on, there's a little rubber grommet in here. We'll put a little sealer around that and then feed it through the hole and we'll be all finished. So that's doing Harrop E-Locker and Yukon 488s in Toyota 80 Series 9.5 rear axle. I'm going to do the front axle tomorrow. I'm probably going to do a complete install. I'm probably just going to hit the high points of the differences between the two. But hopefully you found that helpful and interesting. If you did, please subscribe below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.